We hear a lot about how unemployment is down and employers are looking hard for good help. Well, I've spent over a decade working on the front lines helping people in career transition, with so many who have and still struggle to find good and meaningful work. Let's have ourselves some pocket sized pep talk because today's guest comes from the front lines as well, knows plenty about the changes that have taken place in the labor market, and he's here to help.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Jason Greer, is the founder and president of Greer Consulting, Inc., one of the top employee and labor relations consulting firms. He's an international best-selling author of Bias, Racism, and the Brain, and People Matter Most. He also hosts the Employee Whisperer podcast. Glad to have you with us, and welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm really it's kind of one of my side hustles, but it's a 12-year side hustle. So I really do want to kind of carve into this. And with you, I want to focus specifically on helping those that are in that transition, that are just kind of stuck. I don't necessarily want to section off by age, but I work with a lot of people coming out of college, and that's one group. But there's a more chronic group that I keep an eye on. So let's start with this one. What do you think is the biggest obstacle that people themselves are putting in the way of all this?
First is sort of getting out of your own way, right? Yeah. It's so interesting to me that we live in this day and age with social media where it seems like whether social media, the internet, we have access to everything literally at the drop of a dime, snap of a finger. And just as a sidebar, because I was reading the other day where parents are having a hard time convincing young kids, that God is not Google, right? So they see their parents praying, but then they're like, why are you praying to God? Well, you just go to Google and find whatever you want, right? An aspect of that is that we have this idea of what the ideal job candidate looks like. We have this idea of what the ideal executive looks like, or the admin, without recognizing that the idea of what the internet is presenting is not really the idea, right? It's the dream, but it's not the reality. Right. So I think what I say to a lot of people as they are seeking to either make transitions into other industries, or they're seeking to get back into the industry, or whatever the case might be, is get out of your own way. First, you got to get out there and let the industry know, or let the job market know that you want a job. And then you have to basically put your best foot forward in terms of what you're looking for.
Yeah, I agree with you. I work with a lot of things in sort of this petri dish of this group that meets a couple hundred people every couple of weeks. So really, you get to learn what some of these issues are. But I do find that as we're trying to get people to get others to believe them, they have to believe themselves. Yes. It's real hard to say, okay, do these 4 things, but oh, by the way, every time I talk to you, you don't seem like you believe you. And that's a challenge, particularly when somebody has been, how many times have you heard this, Jason? I won the 6th interview, and then it was down to me and 3 or whatever, and they didn't get it. To be that close, how can you not carry that with you to the next opportunity that presents itself?
Well, it's difficult, but I want to level set here.
Yeah.
Because 20 years ago, if you went through 6 or 10 interviews, that was sort of standard, right? You might not get one interview, but you might get the job in the next interview. So there was a certain level of grit that's developed, especially as you're looking to get a new job. Today, what people generally say is, I went through 3 interviews and I haven't gotten employed. I haven't been employed. What's wrong with me? Well, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe it just wasn't necessarily a good fit. Yeah. And I've been around the block long enough to know that sometimes the fit that you think is going to be right for you, actually in the long run wasn't right for you as it pertains to this.
Yeah. And I always slide in, and what was the network connection that you had going in? And sometimes, you hear crickets and you listen, there's good news and bad news. The good news is, these numbers better than me, but I hear it's well north of 80% of jobs that people are getting are coming through some sort of network connection. I'm trying to figure the bad news. I guess the bad news is 80% of the jobs, if you're not networking, are coming through network connections.
Sure.
And I'm not reading a crystal ball, but I think a lot of times when I hear that sad story, when I'm talking about 8 interviews, I mean for the same employer, closer and
Right.
closer and closer, and then no. And I'm wondering how was it a network connection that was in that final three with you? And the employer is not going to tell you, but
Right.
I keep focusing back on networking.
Well, I think that's the key is your network. What they say, your network is your net worth, right?
Yeah.
And what I generally tell people, especially if, and let's just cut to the chase here, especially if you happen to be a potential employee over the age of 45, and you're looking at either reentering the workforce, you're looking at moving to another job. One of the things I'll say to you is go about, LinkedIn catches a lot of heat for multiple reasons. But one of the beautiful things about LinkedIn is that it is an awesome networking tool, right? You'd be amazed at the number of connections that you might have through LinkedIn, and their connections might have further connections, which you can tap into. Because what I often find, and the advice that I give people who are looking to jump into the market is this: before you apply, just take a step back and look at the landscape. Who do you know within that organization? Or who do you know who knows somebody within that organization?
So if you're looking at potentially applying for a job or making some type of move, go into LinkedIn and take a look at your contacts and then look at who those contacts are connected to within that organization. Because what I generally find is that people who are interviewing for multiple jobs, they get the interview, but they're not getting the position. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they are answering cold. And when I say they're answering cold, they're not answering in terms of what they know the hiring manager is looking for. They're coming in assuming they know what the hiring manager is looking for, which means they really don't know the business beyond what's on Google.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of vanilla spec sheet is just well, I feel like somebody's just sort of crossing their T's and dotting their I's, but that's not really telling the full story. But I'm glad you're pushing on LinkedIn, Jason, because truly, I'm not a big Facebook guy. I wish I was a
Sure.
little bit more on the Instagram. I can tell you the social media pieces that have just fine, but I take LinkedIn very seriously.
Oh,
And
it's a game
yeah,
changer.
right. And that is the garden that I tend. And
Yes.
particularly for people in career transition, listen to what Jason's telling you, because we're talking about uh, not getting stopped at that 1 yard line and
Yes.
at least having that network connection to help you cross that line. And LinkedIn will do it. And I'm a great case study. Please don't everybody hit my LinkedIn. But when I get somebody who says, "Hey, I noticed that you're connected to Jason here. Could you connect the two of us?" I take that very seriously. And
Yes.
quite frankly, on the other side, if I reach out to a Jason and he says, "Yeah, no, I'm not interested," I got plenty of people I'm connected on LinkedIn. I send a very nice email back going, "Well, okay, well then good luck to you. I'm going to actually delete you from my LinkedIn group because I thought that's why you were there." I say it with a few more sentences, but basically, out. I don't want you. I don't want you. You're disturbing the spirit of LinkedIn to me.
And I'll tell you, look, I'm blue check mark on Facebook. I'm blue check mark on Twitter
Ooh,
and soon to be on Instagram. It sounds great, but my true value is what I have and what I have put into LinkedIn.
yeah.
Because look, I'm a consultant, which means that I'm looking for businesses that are in need of my services. And even though likes are great on Facebook and retweets are great on Twitter, for the most part, your value is on LinkedIn because that's where the business is. That's where the money is.
Yeah. Don't they call LinkedIn the new resume? If somebody wants to look
Absolutely.
at you, that's where they're going.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's talk about some elephants in the room. You kind of brought one out. I wanted you to go first on when we were going to get to age, because I
Yes.
know that's just a big issue. And I actually gave a presentation once called Isms. And I said, there's a lot of isms. There's racism, there's ageism, there's baldism, there's a ton of isms out
Hey,
there.
man.
And yeah, I see it. And but the reality is, yeah, there is, but not everybody is hung up on an ism.
Sure.
And a lot of times it's the candidate that's really hung up on it. And so For me, hey, the bad news is it exists. The
Mhm.
good news is it doesn't exist everywhere. How hard are we going to use this to hold us back? So, uh, I guess, one of the elephants in the room, and that's an elephant in the room. One of
Yeah.
the elephants in the room that kind of gets to me is um, the gap. Everybody, and frequently with an older candidate,
Mhm.
particularly women that I work with, they've raised the family or they've done something where there's that gap. Maybe they took care of an older mother or parent,
Sure.
but there's the gap. Help them out a little bit. What do you tell people who are sitting there looking at that resume and completely fixated on this gap on their resume?
It's the 21st century, and you can make anything look like a selling point, right? If you are, let's say the example that you gave, if you spent 2 to 3 years raising your children, guess what you are an expert at? Project management. And you can tie what you did maybe prior to taking a time out to obviously do very sacred work, which is taking care of your kids. You can tie the work that you did prior to with the work that you did raising your kids. And here's another thing is that we're in the land of side hustles. Employers are 20 years ago, if an employer saw that you tried your own business for a year to 2 years, they might have said, well, this is a person that doesn't know how to finish what they start.
Yeah.
Today, they're only expecting that the average tenure for someone who's working in corporate America is 2 years before they move on to something else. So what I generally tell people is create a side hustle, even if it's a LLC that you do maybe 1 to 2 hours in, because you can transfer the skill sets that you are utilizing in terms of raising your children, running your home, doing whatever else, and you can transition that into what it looks like to be your own business. And then when you actually get into the interview, fake it till you make it. I am a big proponent of the I am the greatest
Right.
monologue, which Muhammad Ali utilized to make you believe that he was the greatest fighter to ever live. He
Right.
made you believe that he was the greatest before he even stepped in the ring.
Right.
That's the kind of attitude that you have to utilize when you go into an interview. Because
Yeah.
if you go in thinking, I'm too old, I'm too black, I'm too bald, I'm too whatever, guess what's going to show up on your face? That I'm too not ever what it is you're looking for.
Right.
But if you go in with the philosophy that I'm the greatest and I'm the trophy, and you have to earn the right to have me on your mantle, that will pay dividends because you never know that hiring manager might actually have gone through the exact same thing that you went through 2 to 3 years before they came back into the job market. So you never know what that point of commonality might be,
Right.
but you won't know until you actually show up and do your job.
Yeah. Well said. I wrote a piece once, borrowing a biblical term, but it wasn't a religious article from me,
Sure.
that was called "We All Walk with a Limp."
Mm,
And I really landed on that and reminded people that we all have our own limp. And in the end, I really believe that it's if you're in front of an employer who doesn't understand you have a limp,
mhm.
there's one of two things: either they are not telling the truth,
Yes,
or they have no ability to have compassion for another human being.
exactly.
But I think, Jason, that frequently we carry that limp in, and what's concerning the employer is our concern with our limp. In other words, if
Yes,
they could reach out and actually insert words, they're really basically saying, I'm not all that hung up on this, but
yes.
you apparently are. And that's what's concerning me right now.
I love having this conversation with you because I have so much to say to what you just shared. I just read this wonderful article by Natasha Nicholson. She wrote this article in talent management, and she basically lays out the case as to why we need to start looking at socioeconomic class as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because so often we talk about diversity and inclusion, we talk about race, we talk about gender, and some of the other tent poles, but we never talk about socioeconomic class. Here's the reality. When you look at the research, more and more people who identify as being members of the lower socioeconomic class, they, in some form or fashion, have a higher rate of health issues, and they tend to drop out of the working class before their time is up. When I say their time is up, I mean retirement.
Right.
What they're finding through the research, though, is you would never know that someone's a part of a lower socioeconomic class until they actually tell you. But so many people lead with that because they war with this idea that I'm not good enough, or I was just good enough to get this job as the janitor, with all due respect to janitors, but I'll never have what it takes to become the CEO. Right?
Yeah.
Well, no one knows that unless you tell them.
Right. Right.
But until you get out of the mindset that you are less than, you're never going to be more than. Does that make sense?
No, does it make sense? I think I'm not a big Twitter guy, but I'm assuming you've tweeted that. If not, that's a home run. I think that needs to be captured and isolated. That's a very valuable point you've made. And yeah, no, I hear it all the time. You know, I told you I gave this presentation called Isms. I wasn't sure how the group was going to handle it, but I found an old Bob Newhart clip of him being a psychiatrist. $5, you pay up front. He doesn't make change, and you won't be in that seat 5 minutes. And somebody's sitting there going, "Okay, I'll try it." And he says, "What's the problem?" She says, "I have this fear of being buried in a box. Every time I think I drive and I think I might be buried in a box. I go into a building, a box. I plane. I keep thinking about being buried in a box." And he says, "Okay." He said, "I got 2 words for you." She gets out a pen. He goes, No, I think you'll remember these words." He says, "Lean in." She leans in. He goes, "Stop it." She goes, "What?" He goes, "You heard me. Stop it." And life isn't that easy. You and I both know that. But at the same time, I think where we're centering on right now is let's control what we can control. And again, if that other individual is got it, that these hangups, thank goodness they're not hiring us. This is never going to work.
Right.
But we have to stop getting in our own way a little bit, and let's play this out as, not take our previous experiences and drag them with us. Because I do hear people even sitting with me saying, "Well, I'm kind of old, and I tell them right up the front, when I was working, our computers are, what are we getting all those stories for? Can you run PowerPoint? Can you run Excel, Microsoft?" That's the answer to the question. We don't need to hear all the other stuff. I think we're shooting yourself in the foot. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to give you an example. My father my father's 84 years old, a retired assistant superintendent, right? Smart as can be, PhD in educational psychology, even at age 84, is sharper than 95% of the world. He's an incredible dude.
Yeah.
So when he retired, he found that after fishing for about 6 months, hanging out with his buddies, he did all the things that were on his bucket list, and now he wanted to go back to work. So there was a opening for this principalship at this academy for young men age grades 1 through 6. I looked at my father and I said, "Dad, with all due respect, you're used to having 6 secretaries. You're used to having everyone do everything for you. And the world's a little bit different. How are you going to handle that when you get into your interview?" He goes, "Can you hear my voice?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "Can you see me?" I said, "Yes." "I'm good." I was like, "What do you mean by that?" He goes, "They can't take away my experience."
Yeah.
He said, "And even if they say no, that's no indictment of me. That's an indictment of them. So when I show up, I'm going to let them know I don't do computers, but I know how to hire someone who'll do computers. I don't do Excel, but I know someone who can do Excel. But what I know how to do is to run a school. What I know how to do is cultivate young men to make them men of exception. I know how to do that." And that's exactly the attitude that my father took in that interview. And understand, my father was one man. He was like 65 against these young principals who had all these degrees and everything. And my father just showed up and was authentically himself.
Yeah.
That's what I say to people is you be authentically you, because in this world of copycats, and if you want to know if it's really a world of copycats, take a look at everybody's Instagram these days, right?
Right.
In a world of copycats, be you and do you. That's going to be the selling point.
Yeah. You hit on something that's a passion of mine right now, and it's something I've been writing about, and that is authenticity.
Yes, sir.
And to me, it's almost like a musical note. Some people, they can hear music. You hit a note, bing, they go, bomb. You hit it. Some people who can't hear music, you hit a note, bing, they go, oh. Okay. Authenticity in a sense is similar. Some people are just gifted. Their voice pauses at the right place. Their pitch moves up at the right place. Their pace slows down at the right place. But some people can't hear that. And I know this is something that you write about, you talk about. I want to move to soft skills a little bit, but I will tell you coming in, I can't stand the word soft skills. I call them performance skills.
Yes, I call them being human.
Right. It demeans what they represent. They're way too important to tag it with the word soft.
Yes, sir.
Okay. There's nothing soft about them.
Yes, sir.
So let's fix the world a little bit, you and me. Because I'm not so sure how many schools are offering performance skill programs. What do we do to fix this gap and help people in these performance skills?
Well, we need to identify that in order to become good at something, you have to do it. And there's power through repetition. Right. So what I generally tell people is, I'm amazed by the number of people that I meet who are so verbose online. And then you meet them in person and they're really withdrawn and really shy. Right. And you find out how many introverts there are walking around everyday society. But unfortunately, they are then applying for jobs in which they have to be extroverts, or they get promoted and they become leaders. And now all of a sudden they went from just working in their cubicle, doing their job, to now being in charge of 300 people and having to interact with those folks. So what I generally tell people is, if you want to develop your soft skills, start talking to people. And I'm not just talking about talking to people on the job. Saying when you're walking down the street, open your mouth and ask people how they're doing. Some people are going to say, well, I'm doing well. Some people are going to ignore you. Or in my case, I'm 6'3", 255-ish, depending on if I've had a Twinkie. So some people will walk across the street. And, that's a subject for another podcast as to why they're walking across the street. But the more you do that, the more you start interacting with people, the more you start fixing your brain around the idea, I can actually do this. You start to develop that direct eye contact. Your body language starts to open. You start to show other people that I'm interested in what you have to say, who you are, and I see you. What I'll say in terms of positive skills, I'm not going to say soft skills. I'm going to say positive skills.
Good.
Is the more you do it, the better you're going to be at it.
Yeah, well said. I do some coaching. I believe you do some coaching as well. Mm-hmm. Just because I'm a professional speaker doesn't make me a great coach. One of the things that really helped me in climbing into this group of people in career transition is I began to coach them. Mm-hmm. And I refer to it as ring work, like a boxer. Yes, I needed ring work. Right. And that repetition you speak about helps. There's two other words that I will often kind of whisper in people's ears when they're a little bit anxious. Also don't like the word nervous either, by the way. I got words I just don't like. But anxious, I'm okay with anxious. You could be anxious. You're not really nervous. But I remind them my two words are track record. What normally happens when you go into this lion's den? Because it's rarely the first time. Well, usually things work out and people kind of resonate to it. Right. But you're anxious right now. Well, because and so sometimes just, as you say, I'm going to use the word ring work, just get some repetition, just practice it. Like an athlete, practice a little bit, but also remember that a lot of times we've been put in situations that are very uncomfortable, where we don't know the outcome. And yet when we hustle and try our best and show up with a really good attitude, usually things work out for us. Let's remind ourselves of that rather than this minute, well, what happens if, I know that's there. What are the odds of that really happening? Yeah, pretty small. Let's not misuse our imagination. Let's go with what normally happens. That's what I'm whispering.
I love that. And it's what you're really talking about is changing your mindset. Yeah. Right. So when I coach people, when I have conversations with people around this, we spend a lot of time working on your mindset. What is it you're taking into the interview? What is it you're taking into the interaction? Because understand that you think that other person's judging you, and they might, but I hate to break it to you, the vast majority of people don't really give a damn about you. Yeah. They're too busy settling on whatever is going on in their lives, especially when you consider how stress-induced this society has become. Right. So all you can do is really show up again and be as authentic as you possibly can be.
Yeah.
Look, and if it's a case of whether it's you're prepping for an interview, whether you're prepping for whatever it might be, repetition, 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 getting in that ring work that you just talked about. I'm a big fan of standing in front of the mirror, having a conversation with myself. It sounds crazy, but having a conversation with myself, especially if I'm going into a situation in which I know the person or the people that I'm going to speak to have a multitude of objections about the work that I'm about to do.
Yeah.
I will sit down and I will actually script out what I think their objections are going to be, and then how I'm going to answer those objections. And then I practice it, I practice it, I practice it to the point where by the time they bring that objection up, I'm already ready.
Excellent. We're talking to Jason Greer. He's the author of Bias, Racism, and the Brain. I'm in a good talk here. Yeah, I happen to believe that we tend to get in our own way a little bit on these things. But let's shift a little bit because I want to get as much out of you as I can right now. And
Sure.
and there's another elephant. It's not necessarily an elephant in the room, but I notice it's a clumsy move people make. You and I both tapped on the brakes a little bit and said, networking is going to be the key. But we've got, as you said, a lot of introverts out there, and my publisher, at least, I'm getting ready to go to an author's retreat. There are going to be 60 authors there. I believe, and I'm not making this up, 3 of us are extroverts. We're all introverts. And this just in, by the way, I'm jumping around a little bit, but you know what introverts do really well? They ask questions and they listen. You know what the greatest thing you can do to warm somebody up and to actually persuade and get them to enjoy your company is ask questions and listen. So all you introverts out there, just understand, if you go with something that's much more natural for you than me, the extrovert, you're actually going to win the day. Now, Jollis jumps off his soapbox, but isn't that kind of a weird irony that they possess a skill that we extroverts wish we possessed, which is for us to shut up and ask questions and listen. That's what moves people.
It is.
Okay, let's jump back on that. I'm glad I got that in. I had to crowbar that in, but it was important. Let's get back on networking. So it's important. We both agree it's important. And yet we have to actually form the words to ask for help. Let's you and I take a swipe at this. I got away, but I want to hear your way first. I'm in front of you. Maybe it's in an email, or maybe it's a conversation that we're having where somebody has set the 2 of us up. Somebody at XYZ company, and we're having a cup of coffee or something, but I've got to at some point ask you for your help. What does that sound like?
I need help. That's what it sounds like. Just be real with you. I need help. But here's the caveat behind that. Asking somebody for help is also putting yourself in a position and letting them know, I will help you in any way that I can.
Yeah.
Even if, let's say, hypothetically, if I'm asking you for help and you look at me and say, I wish I could, but the people that I knew in company ABC have since retired or they moved on. There's nothing I can do for you.
Yeah.
That's cool. How can I help you?
Right.
And then sit back and listen, just as you talked about.
Right.
Because what you often find is people are pretty guarded about their networks, especially if they don't really know you.
Right.
So that person might have said, I can't help you because the people that I've known that I knew have moved on to other organizations. Well, that might be a little white lie because they still know somebody else within that organization, but they don't know that they can trust you.
Right.
Because if I make that referral, if I make that recommendation, let's say you fizzle out. Well, then you basically burned a bridge with a relationship that I might have worked hard to cultivate over the years.
Right.
So even if that person does not have something to offer you at that time, offer something to them. Because then when they see what your heart is, and watch this, they understand the skill set that you bring to the table because they watch how you help them work out a situation. That's when they're willing to potentially open up the coffers for you.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, I'm gonna throw one more piece in there. By the way, I'm a former Xerox guy. Everything's a process. I don't tie my shoe without a process. But I promise I'm fun on the weekends. I really am. I'm not so process driven. I'm just watching my commanders get pounded. But I'm just hanging out. But
we could talk about them all day.
All right, but step one, I totally agree with you. We laughed at it, but I want to tell you something. That's exactly what I would do. One, at some point, you have to look them in the eye and say, I need your help.
Yes.
But step two for me is, and I love this piece, see what you think. I always say, I really respect what you've been able to do.
Mhm.
If you were me, Jason, how would you go about, you know, at trying to get a position with Northrop Grumman or wherever this person's working? I'm talking about a network connection where they're on the inside and I'm looking for help. The cool part about, first of all, I really respect, your opinion. It works with me. I can tell you that right now. Really immediately makes me focus and bond a little bit with you. And when you say, if you were me, what it does is two things. First of all, I always hear, well, you're going to need to get, talk to this guy or do that. But I'm telling you, I can set my watch on it. You count to three and with a pause, and you'll hear the next words are, I tell you what, send me, I'll make the connect. All of a sudden, we're working together now. So I like that, that I need your help. Now we're focused.
Yes.
I respect your opinion. Now I've got your attention even more. If you were me, that puts some teeth to it. And that's the one that I kind of put forward to people who are trying to make that piece.
I love that.
Yeah. And the cool part is you try it. When your next person that you could throw that out there. It's always, here's what you're going to need to do. 1,001, 1,002, 1,003. And let's just do this. I'll reach out. You send me that resume. I'll copy you in, make the intro. Now we're working together. And that sure beat, how do I get this conversation? How do I get this conversation started? Hamana, because that's tough. And then when you throw the introvert word on there, that's even tougher. But if you don't like that, folks, find a process. And like Jason said, then rehearse it a little bit so that it's a little bit more comfortable so we can get at that authentic piece. Now we're hitting on all cylinders.
Love it.
All right. I could keep you all day, and maybe we will do this again because I think there's plenty of elephants in the room.
Many things we could touch on.
How about you personally? I'm just meeting you. You seem like a really interesting guy. Any mentors of that my dad was my mentor. I got a feeling your dad is fitting the mentor column. So we're going to move the dads aside for a second, other than our dads.
Yeah. So great question. So I'm glad you said that because I was going to say my dad is my ultimate. I was that kid that I go to my friends' houses and they had those posters up of Emmitt Smith and all these other players. And I never had any posters up because I had my dad. So he was my superstar. But I'll say my biggest mentor, the biggest influence in my life has been Brenda Bacon, the CEO of Brandywine Senior Living. And gosh, Brandywine was my first client in 2007. I started my business 2005, and it took me 2 years to get my first client. And not only has it been a fantastic relationship in terms of Brenda opening the doors for me to become what I've become, but I got an opportunity to watch the way that she leads. And she leads from the heart. This is the only CEO that I've ever seen. She has a community of, I think she has a business of maybe 40 communities across the country, and anybody can call her on her cell phone. And it makes for a very busy life.
Yeah.
But when people work for Brandywine, they're not just working for Brandywine, they're working for Brenda. And that's so she's been my primary mentor from a business standpoint. And I have about 100 mentors who I've never met. When I say I have 100 mentors I've never met, I am a voracious reader. And so if an autobiography drops or if, somebody puts out a good business book, I will devour that book and I feel like they're talking to me.
Right. Well, and that's powerful. And reading, folks, listen to it. You can listen to your book on tape, but reading. And Jason's got, I noticed you got a couple books out. Is Bias, Racism in the Brain? Is that a newer book for you?
Yeah. So that came out in 2020 or 2022.
Okay.
And no, I'm so sorry, 2021. My apologies. So
these are like your children. You got to learn these things.
Yeah, man. It's crazy because Bias, Racism in the Brain was so personal because we, myself and my co-author, Phil Dixon, we wrote it in response to the George Floyd moment. And I was a victim of cross burnings when I was 17 years old. So you're talking 1991 by the KKK. They burned crosses in protest of my family moving to Dubuque, Iowa. And we were coming under what was called the constructive integration plan, whereby they were going to bring over 100 Black families, but they never told us. So as you can imagine, with any type of forced integration, even in the 90s, that was met by a large group of people who happened to be 99.9% white. The feeling was that we were going to come in and take their jobs. We were going to take their livelihoods. And I'll never forget my father being on Oprah with one of the McDermott brothers. The McDermott brothers were the ones who were really spearheading this, anti-Greer movement. And this 19-year-old kid looked at my father and said, "You're going to come to Dubuque and you're going to take my job." Understand, he worked construction. My father was a PhD in educational psychology. My father looked at him and said, "I'm no threat to take your job." Right? So this idea that we're going to come in and try to replace you is ridiculous. So we took the stories that I experienced in my life dealing with racism and other things. We applied it through the lens of the brain, because what we've discovered is that we don't necessarily have a race problem in the world. We have a brain problem. And our brain is telling us a story about the outside world, and 98% of it's untrue because it's being filtered through our experiences, through our family, through our socialization. And those have biases attached to them as well. So that's where bias, racism, and brain comes from.
Wow. First of all, I'm grateful you shared that story with me, and thank you.
Thank you.
What you've also heard, folks, is it's something I truly believe from great authors is they don't find a book, the book finds them.
Yes,
and
sir.
Clearly, this book found you, and that makes it even more appealing to me to read. And I'm going to read that book. And then I'm going to write a review on it. Remember, we don't just read books, ladies and gentlemen. We say thank you by writing a review. It means a great deal to the authors. I'm speaking for Jason now, but believe me, he's nodding. Okay. So we're going to get that book. Is there an audio version?
Not yet. Not yet. We are actually making that move next month. We're making that move next month.
Get it in there.
Yeah. Can I say something? You brought
Yes,
up a point about really your books find you.
Yeah.
But when you asked when the book came out, Bias, Racism, and the Brain is still so personal to me,
right,
that it feels like I just wrote it yesterday.
Wow.
Because it's always there with me, right?
Yeah.
And it's versus the People Matter Most book, which is a cool book. It was my first book.
Right.
But that was more of, and it was experiential, but it was kind of boring. I will readily admit that. Whereas this has been more of personal from my heart.
Good. All right. But it wasn't boring. It's just, again, I have 3 kids. They're all wonderful. Each one appeals to a different kind of crowd.
Yes, sir. I love it. I'll go with that. I'll go with that.
Oh, we love our kids. End of story. Kids, I'm not talking about any of you right now. I'm just telling you. Anyway, listen, before I get into hot water, I am really glad you were able to come on this show. I've enjoyed our conversation immensely. And again, I'm grateful you were on, and I'm moved by that story you told. That book just jumped light years in my head, because I like hearing how a book is found and how it finds us. And that's when you carve into a book like that with that kind of story, you're going to read something from the heart. And so I already know it. I can't wait to get a hold of it. And that's why when it becomes an audiobook, will you be the one reading it?
I will be.
I hope so. Because if you weren't, I was going to twist your arm and say, yeah, you are. Got to come from you. Got to be your voice. Anyway, how do people get a hold of you, Jason?
You can find me through my website, hiregci.com. You can find me on Twitter @LaborDiversity, as well as Instagram, and definitely LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn.
Good. I got 10 more questions I didn't even get to. We're going to have Jason on again. And I've yet to have a repeat guest. When I do, you're going to be one of them. Thank you so much for being on the show.
You were
truly
awesome. Rob, you're awesome. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate that. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.